kicking off the recording. All right, we're now recording. Yeah, so I studied kind of something related to computer science, but not exactly. And when I was working for a job that was more related to that, I found myself, it was a lot of spreadsheet work, and I was just automating all of that with VBA scripts. And then I realized I liked coding a lot more. And so I actually took a decent amount of time off from work, and I focused solely on just teaching myself Python. That was at a suggestion from a friend. This was probably 2017. And I went pretty far with that by just building personal projects and doing Coursera courses and things like that. And then I got super lucky, and I triggered this thing called the foobar challenges in Google search. So it doesn't exist anymore because LLMs have kind of broken this method of finding talent. But it used to be the case that if you searched for certain keywords, Google would send you an invitation to coding challenges. And I got lucky. I triggered one of those, and it just so happened that Python was one of the languages that I could submit my solutions in. And so that was actually kind of the lucky break I got that got my foot in the door to Google. I got hired in an analyst role, and then basically over the last 6 years, I have always put my hand up whenever there's an opportunity to do systems engineering or machine learning engineering. And so I've actually been fortunate enough to be rewarded and put onto the technical ladder and into an engineering role full time. So yeah, I have a very non-traditional path, and happy to answer questions about that if anyone has any. But I will pass it on to Kevin.
Sure, yeah. I'm probably a good person to follow you because I have probably the most traditional path possible into Google. So quite a contrast, which is great. It shows you that there's lots of ways to get into not only Google, but just other big tech companies. There's a lot of similarities between a lot of the big tech firms. So yeah, I have a master's degree and a bachelor's degree in computer science. I've been a software engineer for pretty much my whole career. Right out of college, I went to Colorado School of Mines, go Ore Diggers. Just a few miles to the south of CU Boulder. And I started my career at Motorola, just doing kind of traditional software engineering for public safety software. At the time, we worked with a lot of Microsoft consultants because it was built on the Microsoft technology stack. I became pretty good friends with them, a few guys on the Microsoft consulting team, and then kind of worked my connections and said, hey, if you ever have an opening, let me know. And long story short, I was able to transition and join Microsoft. And so I was at Microsoft for 7 years. And then in 2021, I actually got contacted by LinkedIn or on LinkedIn by a Google recruiter. There was a big hiring push in 2021. And they were trying to hire a bunch of people. And I got contacted, and Google was a place that I had always wanted to work, a place that I was like, oh, could I hack it? Could I make it at Google? Kind of one of those dream destinations for me. And so I was like, yeah, I got to try it. And so prepared for the interviews. A good thing to note is even though I got recruited by or contacted by a recruiter, which is great, that's amazing because it's the first step that's super, super important. That was the only step that was given to me. Everything else, you still have to apply for or study for the interviews. You still have to pass the coding challenges. You still have to pass the hiring committee, all of that. So once I got contacted by the recruiter, I spent probably 3 or 4 months studying for the interviews. And I have lots of tips and tricks on that, which we can get to. And then thankfully I was able to pass the interviews and got the offer. And then I've been at Google for a little bit over 2 years. And I just moved into the management position probably 3 months ago. So I joined as an SRE, which is called Site Reliability Engineering, which is essentially operations. It's how the teams that are dedicated to keeping everything running. And I worked on an internal system called Borg, which if anybody's worked with Kubernetes, I don't know if you have, Borg is essentially the predecessor to Kubernetes. And so I worked on basically the team that keeps Borg running inside of Google, and then transitioned over to the Google Drive management role that I have now. So yeah, and again, I think, do we have time in your agenda for Q&A?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Yeah, because I think it's obviously important for us to give the background, let everybody kind of know who we are and where we came from and stuff like that. But I would love to hear from the students and get some questions and see what everybody else is thinking. So with that, Sumit, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kevin, and congrats on your recent move to the managerial role.
Thank you.
So yeah, for me, path to Google, so first of all, I'm in a non-engineering role at Google. So yes, they do exist. For you guys who may not be interested in engineering role, know that there are other options at Google as well. Like I said, I'm a technical account manager at Google. I was also hired in 2021, similar to Kevin. Like he said, there was a huge hiring push during 2021 because Google was focusing on a lot of strategic areas like AI, cloud, and other things. In addition to that, right? My path to Google was I graduated from University of Maryland with a telecommunications degree, and from there I was hired by another cloud-based company or a content delivery network company called Akamai Technologies, and I worked with a lot of FinServe customers for them. And at Google, they were looking for someone who had, experience with FinServe, FinTech, and also new cloud. So that's why I was reached out by one of the recruiters on LinkedIn. I was lucky enough to, not go through that application procedure, but have the recruiter reach out to me. But once that was done, like Kevin said, right, you still have to go through that rigorous process of, clearing those interviews, not just the technical ones, but also, how you're going to demonstrate leadership, how you're going to, thrive in ambiguity and things like that. You need to be prepared to show those attributes in the interviews. Once I cleared the interview, I've worked with a lot of different desert mountain customers. Some of them FinServe, some of them non-FinServe, some of them in gaming industry, some of them in other government services and things like that. The main thing that I would want to say, when you're looking for path to Google, you need to have a strong foundation. You need to have your basics very clear. It's not about those flashy or those in-demand skills only. If your basics and fundamentals are clear, that would help you build those other skills more faster. And Google looks for if you are coachable enough, if you are going to grow when we hire you. So always keep that in mind as well. Sharpen your basics, and then go on to touch other areas as well. Yep.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like we kind of touched on this, but do we want to maybe go through, what do you think, Kevin, and I'll give my own opinion on it as well, makes an application successful, as well as maybe some like resume tips about, when you're architecting your resume, what are things you're looking out for? And I guess to start, I think what makes an application successful, at least as someone who's read the application on the other end of it, when you're hiring, surprisingly, it's kind of a very risky situation. Like you're very nervous that you're going to hire the wrong person, and the cost of that mistake is very high when you're on the other end of the hiring process. And so having a good understanding of what the job description is asking for, as well as, if you can get in touch with people who are internal or whatnot, maybe give you a little more context on the situation. Applications that stand out, in my opinion, usually have some specific knowledge. Either you have experience in something that's relevant to the particular, like I work in fighting abuse. And so people who have security backgrounds or extra knowledge and certifications on that end of things are going to stand out a little bit more. On the other hand, I think it's not always just particular. Sometimes it's just a matter of being very clean and consistent, right? Like if your resume reads consistently, the formatting's the same, like there's no spelling mistakes, just the evidence that someone's gone through and been very thorough in what they're doing, it is a very good sign in my opinion. It irks me in the world of ChatGPT to see resumes with spelling mistakes and applications that, a lot of these low-hanging fruit that I think now are very easy to catch with automated tools. You should leverage those, and also don't be afraid to let ChatGPT rewrite your stuff. Obviously read it and make sure that it sounds good, but if I had that 5-6 years ago, that would have been a boon. Yeah, sorry, or Gemini. Sorry, it's like Kleenex versus tissues. I just got the one word stuck in my head. But yeah, I'll pass it on to Kevin.
Sure, yeah. Thanks. Those are all great tips. Yeah, I was going to joke, is ChatGPT that Gemini competitor? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, those are all great tips. I would say a couple like just very simple, like pragmatic things. So first of all, you said is everybody here a grad student, or is it a combination of grad and undergrad?
It's grad students.
It's all grad. Okay, great. So I would say if you can, really try to keep your resume to one page, particularly at your experience level, where you're at kind of in your career. You should be able to get everything onto one page. If you have to spill over to more than one page, at most two, but that's it. And even that's like the exception. Like really try to stay to one page and try to be as succinct as you can. I think there's some stats out there that the average resume gets looked at for like 15 seconds or something like that. So you do not have a lot of time. You want to be very, very careful and selective with what you put on your resume, because it will be glanced at very quickly and then moved on to the next. So just make sure that what you're putting on there is really high impact and high profile. And then the other thing I would say is try to highlight your experience as much as you can. Now, some of you may have some professional experience. You may have internships. Maybe you even took a job in the middle of your schooling, and took a year off of school. Some people do that. Certainly seen that before. But try to highlight your work experience as much as you can. And even if you don't, you probably have some projects, or you did something for your fraternity or sorority, or like you probably have something tangible that you did that you can highlight as experience. But what I would say is, no matter what you're doing when you're highlighting your experience, really focus on the impact and the outcomes of the work that you did. I've seen resumes from college people who said, "Oh, I had an internship and wrote 10,000 SQL queries over the course of 3 months." And it's like, okay, that tells me you know how to write a SQL query, but what did that actually do? If it's like wrote 10,000 SQL queries to optimize the inventory and reduced search time by 25%. Now all of a sudden you've got my attention. It's like, oh, okay, you actually know how to use technology to achieve some sort of outcome. So really focus on sort of what was the impact, and sort of like, how was the world, even slightly, but how was the world different after the work that you did? If you can highlight that, I think that lands a really good message, and that makes that's going to make recruiters want to contact you. That's going to make people like me or Ted or Sumit, when we see your resume, that's going to make us be more interested in kind of the work that you did. And we'll dig into that too. Then we'll see that, and then through the interview process, we can be like, tell me more about this. How did you optimize this? And then it gives you a chance to kind of expand on it. So those are my tips. One page, and focus on the impact and the outcome. Sumit, you have the challenge of going third, so you have to come up with something unique and original that Ted and I haven't said. But I'll hand it over to you.
No, I think it's easier for me. I'll just summarize what you guys said in different words.
Exactly. You're the LLM.
Just kidding. Yep. So really, agree with what both Ted and Kevin said. One important thing and one line you should always keep in mind when you're writing a resume: it's only about quality and not quantity. It could be 5 pages, 10 pages, but if there is all quality content, it'll matter only then, right? Try to stick to one page, like Kevin said. Important thing there is, when you are writing about your projects, write about, what you did to contribute in that project. It could be a group project, it could be a college project, right? What was your role in that? Try to clarify that in the resume. And the outcomes, if those are measurable, put those numbers in there, not just like Kevin said, not 10,000
Yep.
lines of SQL queries, but what was the outcome because of it. If you were in an internship, you could have saved some money for your company, you could have saved some thing for your customers. What was the actual outcome? Focus on that, right? The other important thing is when you are writing your resume, you need to make sure that you are not overdoing it. A lot of people put a lot of formatting in the resume, a lot of fancy stuff in the resume. It doesn't matter if your resume is as simple as words or it has a lot of images or whatever. The quality of the content would matter. So only and only focus on that. And like Ted mentioned, right, there are a lot of tools out there which you can leverage. Not just spend hours and days writing your resume. Thinking about your resume, yes, you can spend hours, days, months, because it's important what you're putting there. But when you're writing your resume, it should not take you a lot of time. You should use the tools, ChatGPT, Gemini. You should use resume builder tools that are out there. You can use LinkedIn and other things. Leverage all those. And what that does is it also tells the person who's reviewing a resume that you've put thought into what you are going to add to your resume. So that's really, really important. Also, touching upon the importance of LinkedIn, keep your LinkedIn profile updated as much as you can. If you are working on a project, you've still not completed it, that's fine. You can put it's a work in progress. This is what I'm working on right now. And these are the things that I've achieved so far with that project. Keep it updated, keep your coursework in there so that we know that you've taken coursework in specific areas that might be important when we are evaluating you for that application. So resume quality and LinkedIn up to date is other two things that I would say are really important.
Yeah, I would definitely double down on the LinkedIn aspect. I mean, I don't know if we're the experts, but we could do a whole hour-and-a-half session probably just on LinkedIn and doing in-depth searches on LinkedIn optimization, how to leverage LinkedIn. That's all definitely worth doing. Actually got 2 LinkedIn requests while we're sitting here from I assume the group, which is great. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to make those connections, but that's a great way to leverage those connections. And we talked about like a few of us got lucky with getting recruiters contacting us. The other way to sort of go around that is to make connections on LinkedIn and get these personal connections. And then, if let's say somebody here made a connection with one of us on LinkedIn and we maybe chatted a little bit offline or something like that, we could actually then recommend you and sort of put you through the process to hopefully try to get you at least into the interview or at least get in touch with a recruiter. So definitely try to leverage LinkedIn as much as you can. It's a really great tool.
Yeah, definitely agree. And my understanding is with Gen Z, they feel like LinkedIn's a little too millennial, so they're pursuing alternative platforms. But whatever works for your generation, I still use LinkedIn. But
TikTok.
So yeah, TikTok or yeah,
which is not actually the worst advice. I have he'll be 20 in like 2 weeks, 20-year-old son in college, and he's studying astrophysics and he wants to go to grad school for astrophysics. And I told him, I was like, start a TikTok channel with like astrophysics content and get like 50,000 followers. And like, then when you apply to grad school, it'll be like, oh, look at this guy. He's got all kinds of, followers. He knows what he's talking about. So like, I'm not saying that's the like straight and narrow path, but if that was something you wanted to do and you were like influential and had good content, it's a way to get noticed. It's a way to stand out. So I'm not saying you have to do it. I'm just saying it's not the craziest idea. So
yeah, agreed. Looks like we got a question.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if everybody can see the chat. I'll read it just in case you can't. The question is, how important is the education section in the resume? Should work experience and projects be mentioned before the education section? I'll let Sumit and Ted give their opinions. In my opinion, I think kind of the traditional standard format is work and project experience comes first, and whatever was most recent comes first. It kind of reads chronological, and then education is sort of always pinned at the bottom. So if I get a resume and I want to see where somebody went to school or what degree they have, immediately I'll just jump to the bottom because that's just where I assume it's going to be. I don't necessarily think that's a hard and fast rule. I just think that's kind of the industry standard and what's expected, but that's my opinion. Sumit, Ted, what do you think?
Yeah, Ted, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. I think I actually switched this. So
Okay, good.
when I
we're
started
that's great.
the first couple of major job application periods of my life, post grad, I had the education at the top, and I think that was partly because I just had internships at the time, and so the amount of work experience I had to talk about was pretty limited. Whereas I was on a design team in college where we designed and built a race car, an off-road like Baja race car, and so that experience actually gave me a lot more practical mechanical engineering stuff. But at a certain point in my mid-20s, I did actually flip it back to what Kevin was suggesting, and I do think it honestly reads better. So I'd say when you're fresh out of grad school, it kind of depends. But if a lot of the relevant experience is from your research and your studies, and you actually kind of list out some of that information in the education section, then I'd say try throwing it at the top. But I think it's kind of a formatting choice.
Yep. And yeah, I mean, for me personally, I like to see projects on top because that is where I like to focus most of my time on. That tells us, whatever studies you are doing, whatever degree you have, how are you applying it? And that matters more, right? You can put your education at the top or at the bottom. It won't matter much, but make sure that you dedicate a lot of space and content to your project section, right? That is where your actual value is shown, because that shows how you applied what you've learned in your degree, in your life, in other things that you've done in your internships, and so on and so forth. And I see another question about publications. Obviously publication is important, but I would still say projects should be at the top, at least for me.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Ted. Sorry.
I was just going to suggest, why don't we save? I see there's more questions coming into the chat. There's a Q&A session at the end of this, so maybe we'll save some of those questions in the chat for then. Just get through the next couple of sections that Nadia had for us. Does that sound good to you guys?
Sure. Yeah.
So I think the next section is favorite projects at Google, and talking in detail about like the challenges on that project and how we overcame those and the impact of the project, and as well, dealing with deadlines and multiple priorities, and sort of having a busy schedule, how we manage that and deal with that. I'll say my favorite project is kind of the one that got me a lot of opportunities internally to switch onto a technical ladder. And for context, ladders are kind of the way that Google breaks down different job roles. And so there's non-tech ladders and tech ladders, and the various aspects of employment around those things are different. So I worked on a credit scoring model. Essentially at the time, GCP, we had some very rudimentary trust signals, but they were rule-based and they were fairly gameable by bad actors. And so the opportunity that we saw there was to create a signal that would help adjudicate these resource allocation decisions in the cloud in a more comprehensive manner. And so at the outset of it, we actually encountered a lot of friction internally, because this was a domain that my team, while we had like from sort of looking at our description of what our team does, we did have some justification for why we were working on the area, it was not a space that our team had stepped into before. And you'll find in very large companies like this, it's not uncommon to step into a space and then realize, oh, there's actually like 2 or 3 other teams that are working on this. And so we encountered some internal friction from them where I think they potentially saw us as a bit of a threat to their own work. And so we had to overcome some of that, which a lot of the credit goes to my former boss, who has since left Google. He works at LinkedIn now, ironically. But it was an awesome lesson in managing personal relationships with people inside an organization. And one of the things that I really liked about him was he always stayed focused on the work, right? Like, even if someone came in and did something that seemed like maybe it was a little bit personal in a meeting, he never kind of got down into the weeds of, sort of politicking about these things. It was always about the work. And he had a very good ability when someone, would start grilling him, which I'm sure, sending your thesis, presenting your thesis in your grad program, you're going to experience that and many other times in your career. But he never let it become personal. And so I think he did a really good job of managing all of these different inquiries on the process, and like, are we qualified? Do you know what you're doing? And some of that was doing our homework beforehand. But I think it's also just his ability to stay calm, cool, and collected in the moment. And really, again, just staying focused on the work, the business, how we are benefiting the business, enabled us to kind of get through all of those hurdles, get things approved, and then finally be able to actually deliver on what we had at this point more architected and made some projections about the impact of it. But we needed to sort of get buy-in from a bunch of different stakeholders before we proceeded. And so once that was sort of all settled and squared away, that's where I came in, and it was just time to deliver and build. And in those moments, admittedly, I'm not the best at handling multiple priorities. What I've learned is to keenly listen to your leadership and gather what is the most important thing to them, and make sure that you are 100% delivering on those specific areas. And so some of the other areas of my job that I, from conversations and seeing what people care about, have realized are maybe not the top of the list. I'm personally not the best at them. I know other people who are much more consistent across all their different work areas. What I've learned is that there's kind of an 80-20 Pareto principle inside an organization. And if you are nailing it on the 20%, it's okay if some of the 80% isn't that great. So that's kind of my personal strategy, is always trying to suss out what is that 20%? What is the really leveraged opportunity in your work to be working on? And so at that time, it was building out the data pipelines and machine learning infrastructure for this project. At other times, it's preparing an incredibly pretty graph for a slide that's going to go to an exec, and hopefully they're going to look at it and there's not going to be any questions. It depends on the moment, but just being excellent at that 20% in my experience has been really helpful in my career. So I'll pass it on to Kevin.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Ted. I guess I don't know if I have a specific project that I would call out, but I would say some of the things that I've learned since being at Google, which all comes from my previous role where I was working on Borg. So essentially, if you're not aware, Borg is the sort of the brains of all the data center, the brain of every data center that we have at Google. And it's the software that runs that has a view of all the machines in the data center and all of the available resources from CPU, memory, disk space. And essentially what happens is if you're an engineer at Google and you want to, so let's say you own a very small piece of like Gmail or Google Docs or something like that, and you want to publish an update to it, you essentially tell Borg, hey, I've written this code, I've created this binary, I want you to run this in, you can specify which data centers, and then Borg will essentially find a place for it to run. So you don't have to go look for a machine, you don't have to go find a machine that has CPU capacity, and so Borg will sort of do all of this for you. And what's been really interesting is just seeing that that's kind of the secret sauce to how Google was able to scale in the way that it did, and the way it was able to serve. I think we have 8 distinct products that have 1 billion daily active users. And so if you think about just that in terms of scale, and keeping that reliable, right, which was a big part of my job in the site reliability engineering, it's just very interesting to see how Google solved this problem. And they did it basically through distributed workloads and distributed computing, and by not relying on, one mega, $100 million server. Every server that we have at Google is it's a very normal, sort of quote unquote normal server, normal specs, nothing crazy about any one individual server. We just happen to have lots and lots of them, but we're able to distribute our jobs across all of them, so that reliability, so that when machines go down, it's okay because there's another machine that can just pick up the workload. And so just kind of learning that aspect of reliability and distributed computing, and having fault tolerance for all of our workloads, and distributing our workloads all across the globe, and making sure things are geolocated so that users in Asia are hitting Asia servers versus users in North America hitting North American servers. That I think to me has been kind of the most interesting part, without getting into like a specific project, but just learning how Borg works. And there's lots of white papers on Borg. You can go read about it. I think it's incredibly interesting and amazing software. And then what Google did probably about 10 years ago, they took Borg and said, hey, this is great. This works for our data centers. It works at billion user scale. It would be awesome if there was sort of a consumer friendly version that was more fit to maybe more traditional workloads, more traditional user bases, things maybe that was a little bit easier to use. And so that became Kubernetes. And so then Google wrote and launched Kubernetes, which is the open source version and sort of the scaled down consumer friendly version of what Borg does. So if you want all of the automated job placement and resource allocation and optimization and things like that, you can get that through Kubernetes, which Google just makes available for free. So I think that's really cool. Sumit?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Before I jump onto my projects, there was a lesson for you guys in the way Ted mentioned about his project, right? You might have heard about STAR method of talking about your projects and things in an interview. Talk about situation, talk about what task you had at hand, what were the actions you took, what were the results. But what Ted did is he went a step ahead. He talked about STAR L method, where he spoke about learnings as well. So it's really important for you guys when you are interviewing at any place, talk about learnings as well. And those learnings the results could be a success or a failure. Don't be afraid to talk about failure. When you're talking about failure and success, talk about what learnings you took from those. Right? Because not all projects would be a success. So a really important lesson for you guys to keep in mind. Now coming to, some of the projects that I've worked on, like I said, I'm on the customer facing side. So I work with a lot of different customers. One example that I can think of right now is, so I was working with a satellite communications company, and we were helping them migrate from on-prem data center to Google Cloud. Now, if you think about it, migration from an on-prem to a cloud provider is nothing novelty. It should not be, this is the coolest project that I've done. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because of the number of challenges that we encountered when we were doing that, right? a satellite communications company, they traditionally come under, a telecom sector, right? And if you know, telecom sector is not the most technological advanced sector. There is a lot of, mindset challenges that you need to overcome for them to, to talk to them, for them to adopt new technologies before it has been proven in the market. So they had that mental block where they knew, moving to cloud was the right move. But every step that we took, we had to, help them understand the potential benefits of it in the long run, and that their, years of hard work is not going away. It's been translating into, something which is keeping up with the times right now. So that was one challenge. What we did is we helped them move from on-prem to Google Cloud. They were using Google Kubernetes Engine, GKE, and on GKE at the as their infrastructure level, they were also using some data technologies, right? They were using some Google Cloud's data products like BigQuery, which is a data analytics platform for our customers. What we did is, they recently had a satellite launch, and we were getting a lot of data from that satellite. We were analyzing that in BigQuery. We were making recommendations to the customer, which were actually helping them to make their business decision. Their long-term goal was to, fight with Starlink, and if you think about it, it's really cool, right? You are getting some real-time data from a satellite. You are analyzing those. You are making decisions on the fly and things like that, right? So those were the things, which I really enjoyed working on, seeing how it translated into actual things for businesses, right? You can get a lot of data, you can get a lot of analysis. How are you applying that to your business, and what are the outcomes of that, right? You are your time to market is faster, your revenue is going down, whatever the outcomes are, those matter in the real world. When you're talking to execs from different companies, you are going to talk about those things, right? How are we helping you bring your overall revenue up? How are we helping you bring your overall cost down? How are we helping you reducing your time to market, or whatever things that matter to that company at that point of time? So there are, a lot of things that you learn when you are doing things like projects, when you are doing things like certification, but how you're going to apply those in an organizational setup is a whole different ballgame, right? You will come across various challenges. How are you going to troubleshoot those? How are you going to solve those and still move forward within the time frame that is, that you are trying to achieve? Those are the important things when you come into, workforce. If you don't have real experience right now, you will notice that those are the important things that matter to organizations. And that brings me back to my previous point that I said in the very beginning, is if your basics and fundamentals are strong, you'll always end up doing good work, because that's where you will go to when you are stuck, when you are troubleshooting a problem. So always make sure that you are getting your basics really strong.
Thanks, Sumit. I didn't even realize I was doing the Star Plus L thing. We're calling that out.
Yeah.
That is a great framework. Yeah, I put a link to that. But yeah, that's definitely something to learn.
So I think the last section that's listed out, besides Q&A, is the future of the tech industry. Google's view on how the industry would be shaped in the near future with the inclusion of AI, and skills to focus on moving forward. I guess I will just caveat all this and say, I don't work in the Google AI labs. I don't. I have probably a little bit more insider information, but don't take any of my predictions as really, really strong, conclusive things here. But from my personal standpoint, as someone who's in a individual contributor role and wants to continue to do that type of work, I'm really trying to get more familiar with the AI tools as an end user, it's really cool to understand the architecture and how transformers work and training and refinement of those systems. But I think the applications are the more immediate opportunity with these new technologies. And so if I was in your shoes where maybe you have a bit more time to really dig into these sorts of things, or maybe you have a project in your program that you could potentially apply LLMs to, really just taking those opportunities to like sit down with the tools and try to solve a problem. I've watched a colleague of mine. He's working on a project where he gave himself the constraint of almost zero code written, right? Like he's asking the LLM to do data analytics for him inside the prompt, and Gemini will generate Python code, run it, produce the results, and kind of do a lot of these steps automatically for him. And that constraint might be, in the long run, it might be unrealistic, where if you want to productionize this, you know, LLMs hallucinate, they have some inconsistencies, and their math skills are a little bit questionable sometimes. So it maybe there will have to be changes made if it does work out. But as an MVP, I was just really impressed by it. And honestly, as someone who does a lot of analytics and runs those queries and crunches the numbers, makes the charts, it was a very counterintuitive approach to say, no, I'm not going to control any of that. I'm just going to let the LLM do it. And I was impressed at the results that were coming out of it. So I think really just, if you don't even have anything for your program, just start a personal project. You know, pick something you're curious about and use LLMs to help teach you more about that area. When I was teaching myself Python, I looked into the 2017 solar eclipse, and I downloaded a bunch of libraries and figured out how to visualize that path on a map, and then like started pinging Wonderground's API for like, what's the cloudiness of this area. I was trying to find like the best spot to view the eclipse. And ultimately, my results weren't that great, because on the day of, like, the spot that my analysis said was, it was super cloudy. So didn't work out, but it taught me a lot of really good things. And so I just think either there's some opportunities that have been put in front of you in your program, or maybe in some of your prior work experience and whatnot. Some of you might have like a side job that you're working right now. But if you don't have any of those, you can make it. You know, it's a choose your own adventure kind of situation. And so I think people who are actively engaging with these tools and experimenting and trying to come up with new ways of applying them, those people are probably going to see more success in the next coming decade than people who are kind of waiting for the LLM to show up and do things for them. Kevin?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. That was great. Yeah. And like Ted said, I don't think any of us are from the Google PR department. So I don't think we've been trained in Google's official public stance on what AI looks like. So this is probably more just our personal opinions. But one of the sayings I've heard that I really resonate with is, AI won't take your job, but somebody who uses AI will take your job. And I think that makes, at least at the current state of AI and the tooling where it is now, I think that makes a lot of sense. And the way I interpret that is, somebody who knows how to use these tools and can leverage it to make their output and their impact better and faster, that person's going to just be more competitive and is going to stand up better in the marketplace. So you know, we have lots of examples. We use AI internally here at Google in our internal code editing applications. Depending on what you're doing, if it's something very simple, like let's say you're just defining a class and you're doing getters and setters, and you've got maybe a data access layer to store this class in the database, And so it's very straightforward. Our AI tooling has seen this pattern thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of times. I'm not kidding. Sometimes, depending where you are in your file, you can type one letter and it will auto-generate. It'll say, I think you're going to do this, and it will be correct. You're like, yeah, I was going to add the name field to the person class, and I was going to do a getter and a setter, and I was going to put that into the data access layer to store it in a SQL database, and it will just like auto-generate a ton of code for you. Now that's great, and it's a huge productivity saver. I mean, it saves you thousands of keystrokes throughout the day. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really provide a ton of value. Like, there's no business logic in there. There's no differentiator. There's nothing that's doing that, you know, any of our competitors couldn't do. So where it really the kind of, and this is a philosophical stance I have, I think there's just something innate to being human that AI will never replicate. Again, this is my own personal philosophical belief. And so focusing on those things where you can use AI to do the things that are undifferentiated, things that are sort of the heavy lifting, the scaffolding, the infrastructure of coding, and then letting AI sort of help you do that as quickly as possible so you can get to what is that business logic? What is that uniqueness? What is that algorithm that you're writing that's going to be a differentiator in the marketplace? What is the thing that sort of only the human brain can come up with, that can innovate and be clever and think of something new and original and unique, and then letting AI sort of do everything else, which to me is great. It's a huge time saver, and then it sort of lets you focus on doing sort of what it is that you do best. But like Ted said, I would definitely leverage the tooling and make sure you're familiar with it, comfortable with it, know how to use it, know how to do prompt engineering, all of that kind of stuff. And I mean, really, like I've had this conversation with my employees. Like, if you're not using AI at least 3 times a week, like, you're falling behind somebody who is. So like, you should be. I just have either Gemini or ChatGPT. Don't tell anyone, but I just have it up in a browser tab almost all the time, just because it's just available, and I fire questions at it all the time. So if you're not using those tools, somebody else is, and they'll probably be more productive than you. So me.
Yeah, huge plus one to what both Kevin and Ted said, right? It's important for everyone to know how to use AI, right? There are a lot of different tools out there already. We gave an example of, resume building, right? To use ChatGPT, use Gemini, use whatever tools that you're comfortable with to do those kind of things for you, and then you can focus the time saved there into other important things, right? So it's really important to first, be a good consumer of AI, and make sure that you understand what's happening there. There are still a lot of areas where people, haven't thought where AI could be applied. If you can come up with those use cases, that's going to be a huge win for you when you talk about those in your interviews. It could be a half-baked idea, yes, that's fine, but how you are thinking of where AI can be applied. And when we talk about AI, there is a lot of talk about how are you going to use AI responsibly, right? It is very important to make sure that we are using AI in a very responsible manner and not using it for the wrong purposes. A lot of big organizations, if you read Google's blog, if you read, OpenAI's blog, Microsoft's blogs, any blogs you read, you will see there is a huge emphasis on responsible AI, not just AI. So, read upon those things and understand why there is a huge emphasis on that, because it has a potential to do a lot of things which are unintended, right? Understand those intricacies there. And when you're thinking about your own use cases, keep that in mind when you're thinking about those, right? So it's really important to understand the importance of responsible AI. Your AI tools can help you generate things like images, videos, and things like that on the fly. But when you talk to organizations, they are going to talk to you about who's going to have the intellectual property of that image. Is it, if I'm using Gemini, is it Google's image or is it my image? Can someone else use my image, or things like that? So when you talk about AI, there are a lot of things which go behind the scenes as well, which you may not see when you are studying about how to code for this thing. But you need to understand that these are the things that are important in workspace, in organizational setup, And if you read about these things and talk about these things in your interviews, this would definitely give you an edge over your other applicants.
Yeah, plus one to that. I know from my own experience that Google has a pretty strong review process around AI safety and or just machine learning in general. As an example, like if you're using a categorical variable like country code, that someone's IP traffic is coming from. I know personally we've had to undergo rigorous reviews where we analyzed across the different country codes, looked at the difference between when we showed the model to code versus not, what the delta between those two responses was, and then comparing that to your baseline positive rate within whatever your classification label you're predicting is. Basically, a C is like, is this model really really biased against certain country codes, and is that bias proportional to the ground truth, or is it extremely disproportionate? Particularly if you start to hone into like multiple slices crossing by multiple variables, you can find these little pockets in a model where it's generalized well to the big population, but in these little clusters, it's actually giving pretty inaccurate predictions because of some assumptions that it's made. And so, yeah, being very thorough and digging into those things is an important part of the process inside companies like Google or Meta, Amazon. But even in your own personal applications, let's say you go and try to start a startup and you've got your own ML model that you've trained up. At some point, it's going to make mistakes. And so at the minimum, you should be aware of them. Ideally, you're mitigating against them in your training data and whatnot. But being aware of that is a really important part of this, because it's easy to sort of just set and forget these systems. And you don't know what you don't know in terms of their execution and output and their bias. All right, I think that all we've got now is Q&A. So I think personally, I would prefer to get the questions asked verbally. Do you guys mind raising your hands rather than pasting them into the chat window? But yeah, if anyone wants to go ahead. All right, Yash.
Hey everyone, I hope you can hear me properly. My question in the chat box is that with the uh, advent of these LLM models, how is the recruiting process changed for the big tech companies? Where I have heard that most companies try to rely on AI interviews as their first stage of the recruiting process. So, how is it on the end of Google?
Sorry, I don't think I completely got that. So could you repeat the question, please?
Um, yes. Um, um, so with the recent advent of these LLM models for Gemini, um, it has the ability to assist a software developer to boost their productivity. And as Sunil mentioned that someone who knows how to work with these models, um, they they are much likely to be hired. So in that case, how will the recruiting process change when it comes to interacting with AI in your job role?
Oh, okay. Well, I will say, at least my personal experience, I do take interviews externally from time to time. I think it's good to keep yourself fresh in the job market and understand what you're worth. I haven't seen that the actual interviews have changed a ton, because ultimately, I think, yes, being able to use these tools is a huge value add, but evaluating your ability to do that is still a bit fuzzy for most companies. And so they still want to see that you have the baseline skills and knowledge that are expected for an engineer. And so I think, at least in the recruiting process, in like doing interviews and coding challenges and whatnot, I've never seen a situation where they say, hey, you're allowed to use LLMs. Go ahead, do whatever you want. I've seen open book interviews where they let you have Google search open and everything but an LLM to solve the problem. Usually those interviews have a lot of like particular frameworks in them and whatnot, rather than just being a basic algorithms question. But I think, at least for now, you still have to be really like top of your game in your own technical abilities. And so I think your ability to leverage AI tools to boost your productivity and whatnot is probably something that is better either sold in your resume, or when you start talking about personal projects and your own experience in an interview. That's where you can start to talk about how you use these tools and how it enhances your productivity. But I'm not aware of like rigorous tests on that ability yet.
Yeah, I think from what I understand, from the question in the chat, it's so you were asked to kind of do prompt engineering in the interview, and they were just trying to test out, whether you can write effective prompts or not. That's how they wanted you to interact with the LLMs. Like Ted said, it's not a very common thing because this AI boom is so new, I would say. Not new in terms of concept, but in terms of implementation by big organizations, it's relatively in very early phases. So if you are interviewing today, tomorrow, in the next year or so, you might have to, work on LLMs in the interviews, but it's rare. Right now, you are still being tested with your, with the skills that are required for a software engineering job or any other jobs that you are interested in.
I would say too, from my perspective, particularly as a hiring manager, I actually don't view the process as any different with having AI. I wouldn't even care if you used an LLM, because what I'm going to do is I want to see you produce code, any way you do it, and then I'm going to dig really deep on that code. So I'm going to ask you to walk me through it. I'm going to give you different inputs and say, what if it's a negative number? What if I give you a letter? Like, what's going to happen? And so I'm really going to make sure you understand the code that gets written. And then I'm going to press you like, well, how does this scale? What happens if it's 1 billion users? What do you do then? And so really just having that in-depth knowledge of the solution and the technology and the code that gets written is, to me, what's most important. Because a lot of people can, even without LLMs, can write the code and maybe generally solve the problem. But when you start digging and poking and going really deep, that's when some people, you can tell that they just don't quite have that in-depth knowledge. So I would say really focus, particularly if you're going for a software engineering job. Different roles have different prep, but for a SWE job, you want to be able to go really deep on your algorithms, your data structures, where things fall down at scale, what are pros and cons, what are alternatives, things like that. And those are things that you won't be able to use an LLM for in real time in an interview. Like, it would just be, you'd be typing way too much. So that's my view on it. But yeah, we could probably move on to the next question.
Rishiraj?
Yeah, hi. Yeah. So
Hi there.
so with all the recent AI buzz around, so are the job roles getting skewed towards AI engineers or machine learning engineers, or are there job roles around developing backend systems and front-end systems still there in the market?
This is an excellent question. Yeah, right now at Google, there's a huge focus on AI and ML jobs. So Ted's job security is probably the highest in the company right now. Yeah, I mean, even just speaking really pragmatically, like in my org, because we are more of a traditional front end and back end team, if I lose headcount, if somebody leaves or changes roles or whatever, I don't actually get backfill for that headcount. That open headcount gets put onto an AI or an ML team. I think that's going to be a temporary situation in the market because there still is going to be the need for traditional front end, back end development. So I think this is a kind of a temporary surge, but the answer is right now, at least from my perspective, there is a huge focus on AI and ML jobs. Yep.
Okay. So like if for example, me myself, if I'm not too much interested towards AI or ML topics, and I like developing systems more, currently I work as a front-end engineer as well. So should I just pursue towards that role only, or should I try out AI ML topics and look into that more?
Yeah, it's a good question. Ted, you're maybe closer to this space. You might have an opinion. I don't know. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
well, I guess there's kind of two different sides of AI ML work, and I think they get conflated sometimes. There's actually engineering these systems, so actually building the system that trains the model, evaluating that model, scaling and productionizing the model's outputs. And then on the other hand, with LLMs now, there's also just a very, getting your tasks done with the tool. I think that obviously if you're not interested in that first description that I listed, that's all totally your prerogative. And if you like front end, back end work, then there's plenty of problems to be solved in that space. But I would not shy away from the second description, the using the LLM as a tool. I think that even in front end, back end, like whatever your work you're doing, it's probably involving writing code on a computer. And these things are just, it's a new tool in your toolbox to solve problems. So I would continue to educate yourself in that manner just to keep your skills fresh. But I don't think that AI ML jobs are just going to replace everything else. I think there's plenty of things where, if anything, building a whole big production ML system to solve a problem is overkill. These systems are still expensive to maintain, both in terms of like the actual resources that they consume and the FTE time that they consume to maintain them. So while I do appreciate that I do have pretty good job security, I think that we are in a period of maybe over-indexing on that a little bit, and that there's going to be a reversion back to mean where a lot of these more traditional software engineering roles are still really important. But as an example, this colleague of mine who I saw the no code, let the LLM do all the work approach, this guy's a back-end engineer who works on tools and developer infrastructure at YouTube. And so, my point being that no matter what your particular role is, using these tools is totally a viable option, and probably will make you more productive and stand out.
Okay, get it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, just wanted to stress on the point that Ted mentioned, right? We talk a lot about AI, LLMs, and stuff like that. If you think about job market and not just big companies like Google, Microsoft, and others, it's really expensive to use these in your own application for those companies. So you're not going to see every company using AI to an extent which bigger companies are using. So when you think about job market, think about where you are going to apply. It's not just 2 or 3 companies. You are going to probably apply to more than 2-3 companies, for some of which may not be using or producing AI related solutions right now. So your knowledge of front end, back end would still be very relevant. It's important how you use LLMs as a supplement to boost your knowledge, or to to write that code and stuff like that.
I was just going to add to this. It's a great question of saying, hey, I really like, front end work or back end work or whatever it is, and I don't necessarily want to work in this area. That's great. Just make sure you highlight that on your resume. Highlight what your interests are, what you're passionate about, the great work that you've done. Maybe you love front end work because you love CSS and the JavaScript, and it's like really highlight that, and then make sure that's known, so that when recruiters are looking, or you contact a recruiter, it'll just be very immediate, like, oh, front end expertise. Like, okay, great, because those jobs have not gone away, like not even close. There will be a place for you, and just the more you can identify or highlight what your expertise is, and what your interests are, the better your chances are of finding a job in that area.
Yeah. And I would, just to add to that, my personal strategy with job applications is I hunt for roles that sound like I would really enjoy doing them. And sometimes they're, maybe one's like front end and the other one's back end, but like that combined with the product that the company makes, in each situation, I'm interested in them. I will make multiple versions of my resume that are tailored to each role, right? To call out the particular experience that I have, and also to sell yourself. Like, there is a bit of a sales aspect of this, where you are a product in the marketplace and you're trying to find a buyer. And so I personally see a lot of value in taking a more of a sniper's approach as opposed to like the shotgun approach of just one resume, apply to 1,000 jobs. I think if you take the time to really tailor your resume and your application to the particular role, you will stand out a lot more and get a lot more lift from those applications. Varun, do you want to go next?
Hey, yeah, thank you. So my question is around how to best position myself to sort of increase my chance of getting a job in the industry. So as someone who has not had a great deal of experience working on AI or learning AI, how late is it for me to sort of pivot and spend most of my time specializing and becoming more competent in AI related knowledge? Or is it better for me to focus on my main strengths of React and front-end development and distributed systems, which have been my primary experiences so far? It's kind of similar to what Rishi Raj asked, but sort of a follow-up question, I would say.
Well, I certainly wouldn't think it's too late to make a pivot at all.
Right.
Yeah, you got plenty of time. I think that it's complicated. I guess the way I look at it for my personal career is like, I kind of look at it like an RPG game, right? So you've got like all these different stats and abilities, and you can take like a min-max strategy, right? And just like max out certain qualities and experiences and kind of discard the others. Or you can go for more of a balanced strategy. But I'm always kind of looking at like what I'm working on internally, or on my spare time, or when I'm applying to a new role, what the work I will be doing in that role is. I'm thinking about like what attributes are going to increase on my RPG attribute stack, and also thinking about it like, as you progress through your career, you are weaving a story, and there's certain junctures that you reach where the story is going to change quite a bit depending on which direction you go. And so trying to just kind of think about like, I know it sounds very loosey goosey and soft, compared to like code, but what is that story, and how, honestly, at the end of the day, like, you work in a very highly compensated technical field, and so you don't have to worry as much about like, oh, is this choice gonna, like, break the bank for me and whatnot. Like, I'm sure all of you guys are gonna get into some excellent roles after graduation, and so not looking at it like from a very closed sort of, if I do this I might fail mindset, but more like, if I go through this experience, what will I have learned? Because I'll be able to jump back in and find a new job, and uh, you'll go through many cycles of your career, and you can sort of, if you're tired of where you've been, you can shake that off and sort of reset multiple times. So you've got many decades ahead of you. It's not too late to make that pivot. But when you're thinking about pivoting and what you want to do next, think about the story that you're going to tell later on. And as well, that sort of skill stack. Like, I know personally, I'm strong on some very technical areas, but I would admit that my soft skills are not as great. And there's a lot of experience I could gain from taking on a role more like what Kevin does as a manager. There's a lot of skills involved in that work that just being in the meetings and in the space with other people who are really good at it, I can tell that that's an area where I could gain a lot. And so there, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and if you really, really like the things that you're strong at, probably keep working on those things. But if you're starting to feel like maybe it's time for a change, be honest about those weaknesses and maybe target a role that is going to really help you grow on those specific areas. So yeah, overall, I would just say it's not too late. Think about it, but I'm sure either direction that you go is going to be a fruitful path for you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for the insight. I was kind of thinking more about the immediate present sort of. I think you are sort of speaking about a more long-term thing, but I was talking about like the immediate 2 or 3 years, like to sort of land a job in this bad job market in the US, right? So I was thinking in that direction, like, is it necessary for me to pivot, or can I really dive deeper into distributed systems or my front end knowledge and sort of be successful in finding good jobs?
I'll let Kevin or Sumit take this.
I have 9 people that report to me, and none of them are ML engineers. So they're sort of more traditional front end, back end roles. Now we are pivoting as a team a little bit. We're thinking of ways we can incorporate ML, particularly around like abusive content detection. How do we use ML models for that? How do we do that responsibly? I mean, everything's sort of grounded in kind of an AI discussion, but everything we do is, more traditional front end, back end work, and I don't see that going anywhere anytime soon. So yes, there is a big push right now for sure. You'll sort of get to like the front of the line, I guess, if you had really deep, in-depth AI and ML experience and knowledge. But it's just because something's prioritized, it doesn't mean the other things are disappearing or going away. So I wouldn't unless you had a really strong interest and you really liked it, I wouldn't like tell anyone to sort of overcorrect and just go become an ML expert just to do it. More importantly, learn the tools, learn how you could incorporate AI and ML into your experience and knowledge that you have already. I think that's will be your best positioning.
Great.
It goes back to Kevin's point that he mentioned earlier, right? AI is not going to take a job. Someone who knows how to use AI. You can use AI in your current thing that you are doing, and that would count as effective as being an AI or ML engineer.
Got it. Yeah.
Caleb?
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, thanks for coming out, by the way. One question I wanted to ask is kind of going off what Ted was talking about. With all the learning available right now, do you guys think that the T-shaped engineer is still the shape you should kind of be going for, you know, a good base knowledge and then strong expertise in one area? Or would you say that, you know, with the advancements of like LLMs and models and just, you know, AI and teaching and learning, that's, you know, maybe having a broader base of expertise is more useful so you can apply it to more areas, and then, you know, if you go get a job in a little bit of a different area, you can always learn quickly? Or would you still stay strong in one area of focus?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say personally, for me, the T-shaped engineer, to me, that's somebody who's more further on in their career, maybe 5 to 10 years of experience. As you work, you'll get that really in-depth experience and expertise. And you may fall into it, or you may be something that you intentionally went after, but you'll find yourself at some point in your career, you're like, oh, wow, I actually know quite a bit about this area, and you'll be the expert, and people will go to you for that, and you'll sort of be known as this subject matter expert. Where I'm assuming most of you are now in your education path and probably starting your careers, I would say focus on the breadth, just having more knowledge of lots of different areas. At Google, particularly when we hire software engineers, we don't hire for specific knowledge or languages. We let you pick your language. You can interview in like 18 different programming languages. We don't care, quite frankly. We look for people who are smart and can get things done, and that's sort of all we care about. And that's probably at an entry-level job, somebody who's just coming out of school with not a ton of work experience. That's what most companies are going to look for, is just that ability to be technically proficient across a broad area and to deliver and get things done and be willing to learn. So that would be my advice. I'll let Ted and Sumit give their opinion.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree with Kevin there, right? If you are looking for a specialist job role, you are most probably, you know, an experienced, at least a, you know, a mid-senior level professional. So it'll come with time. Right now, focus on, you know, exploring different areas and then decide for yourself what you think is going to be best for you. Today, AI might seem the best bet. Tomorrow, there might be some new technology coming up, which could be, you know, more valuable at that point of time. So try to focus on, you know, learning a lot of things, how you are going to apply those learnings in different scenarios, different settings, projects, you know, school projects or group projects and things like that, and then decide for yourself where you want to focus.
Yeah, I think I agree that it's hard to, at your stage of your careers, it's hard to say whether you're a T-shaped engineer, or maybe it's an I-shaped, you're just an expert on one particular area. I think those are things that you still need some time to grow to really know what you are. I would pitch that it's possible to be a fork-shaped engineer and maybe have like a handful of things that you're more knowledgeable than average on. Probably your forks are not as long as the T, but I do think with LLMs now, you can. It's very interesting because it used to be the paradigm was in any given field, there's always kind of there's a magic book that can give you like in the 80-20 of the knowledge. For 20% of the reading time, you can get 80% of the knowledge if you find the right book. Most fields have that book in one form or another. Now, I think the LLMs kind of give you a generalized source of that, and you don't need to go and hunt and find that book to like really ramp up on a particular area. So I think just having the stance of being curious and wanting to learn new things is going to really advantage you as long as you're proactive and leverage those tools to get you that initial 80%. And then boom, your fork is already getting decently long, just you plus an LLM. And now you can start to advance on some of that deeper knowledge that requires a decent amount of experience with the specific subject area. I do think that LLMs are going to make it's going to be a real big opportunity for generalists, where, people who just like to try new things and maybe don't have expertise on them are going to get some really amazing results in those areas, just because they sort of raised their hand and took the opportunity to dive into something new. So I'd say don't be afraid to learn new things. Don't count yourself out. If imposter syndrome is on your shoulder, talking negative, you need to ignore that voice. It's wrong. The imposter syndrome is the truth of it is that, like, everyone has like, even the people who are cracked engineers and really like 10x and stand out, they're team players. They play a role in a larger organization, and so no one person can do it all. And so you shouldn't really count yourself out, because oftentimes just pure execution beats the most brilliant ideas. The person who sits there and just makes it happen, right? And whether that's using LLMs or your own personal skills, or finding other people who do have those skills and getting them involved, all of those, what at the end of the day, what matters is the impact and the actual, like, what changed about the world before and after you intervened on it. So I guess, just generally speaking, I would see this as an opportunity to be able to dive into new fields with a lot less friction.
Okay, cool. Thank you guys. I really appreciate your responses. And then just a final, I think it kind of like what you guys are saying. I guess I can feel like I can tie that into like one piece of advice that I always hear is like, you only fail if you don't try, so now that there's a lot more access out there, you got to try what you want to try. So thank you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to that point, it's worth noting, I don't know about you, Ted, but I didn't get into Google till my second time. I tried interviewing maybe 8 years ago, and I didn't get into Google. So, and that's very common. To actually get into Google on your first try is actually probably the exception more than the rule. So, if you try and you don't make it, like, don't worry about it at all. It's totally fine. That happens. So.
Yep. And in my case, I didn't really get into Google because I didn't interview for an engineer role when I got into Google. So I took what I could get, and I got into a more junior, less technical role. But within the company, one of the things that I do love about Google's culture is, if you really want to work on something, it's going to be hard for someone to tell you no. And so anytime there were opportunities to start writing system code and editing, things that had like big latency impacts or scale impacts, I was always like, hey, I know we don't have enough engineering time. Why don't I take a crack at it, and we'll see if I can implement this. And if it doesn't work, then you wise engineers over there, you can take care of it. But we have a schedule with deadlines, and it seems like we don't have enough hands to solve this problem. So I'll try it. And that's basically kind of what got me into my current role, where I get to do that on a day-to-day basis. So your career path is a non-linear thing. You sometimes won't realize that you're setting yourself up for success later by just being sincerely ambitious about the opportunities that are in front of you. So don't if it doesn't go perfectly to plan, that is not a mistake. That is just part of the path that you're on. And so you'll be surprised at where things will end up, the cool full circle coincidences in your career, where you look back and say, wow, I didn't know where I was going, but I knew what I wanted to do. And it's awesome how sometimes this whole idea of manifesting things, like, there's kind of some truth to it. And so, yeah, I would just say, just be eager and curious and willing to take a little bit of risk, especially early in your career. If you don't get hired into Google or Amazon or Meta, and there's some startup that, yeah, maybe the offer is not as good, but some really interesting subject matter, go for it. And just like dive into that subject matter, really, really learn about it. There's many doors in front of you, and just because one closed doesn't mean that all of them are closed to you.
I know we're a little bit at time. I've actually have a few more minutes if there are more questions. Ted, I don't know about you, but I'm happy to stay on if there are more questions.
Yeah, me as well.
Looks like there is one in the chat about personalizing resumes for each role. Just talking more about that. And I'll let Ted talk here in a second, but I would say, just really focus. It starts backwards, right? Like you sort of back into it. Like look at the role that you're applying to and look at what are the skills and expertise and area of technology that they need, and then work on that to highlight that into your resume. And again, really make sure that it's something that you want to do and want to work on. I was going to talk about that too, like the pivot of like, oh, maybe I should just pivot to AI and ML. Like, yeah, if you are interested in that, you definitely should. If you're not, don't do it, because if you're working in an area that you're not interested in, you're not going to be happy at all, and you're not going to last very long. And people who are interested are going to be way, way more productive than you. So really make sure to be specific about what are the areas you want to work in, what's the technology that you like, and then go after those roles, and then sort of work backwards to your resume and make your resume kind of aligned to what are the keywords that they're looking for. That's my take. Ted, what about you?
Yeah, I think definitely don't apply to jobs that you are just doing it because you have to. Yeah, it's just not going to go well. And Kevin's right that the people who are curious and really engaged in the subject matter, it's just natural. Like they're staying late to like really figure something out is not going to be a chore for them. It's going to be pleasurable, and it's hard to beat that. Yeah, in terms of like personalizing resumes, I guess pre-ChatGPT, pre-Gemini, I would go through and read in detail about the role, as well as, I guess I personally took an approach of more like company-based applications. So I would look at a company and their products and what they're doing and make the decision on whether I wanted to work for them at that level. And then I would go and look through all their open postings and see if I can find something that is, close enough related to my experience as well as my interests that like I would make a decent applicant. But my perspective is that like a big part of what you're interested in is the product and what it's actually doing for the end users. And so read through all that information and then go to your resume and just give it a very rough sort of critical read of, does this really sell to this particular application? And then go through, look at the keywords, update that kind of information. And perhaps there's some experience that you didn't have on your resume that in this case you would really benefit from adding. And I guess on that note, one thing that I don't do enough, but when I've done it, I've seen a lot of benefit from, is like at the end of every week when you're working, or you could even do this while you're in school, but at the end of the week, just write a little summary for yourself of what did I do? What did I accomplish? What did I learn this week? And if you do that for a whole year, you have it's a treasure trove of examples and information that you can put into your resume. And so being proactive and sort of logging those things in advance of you needing them is really beneficial. With the LLMs today, I would say you can even take this a step further. Copy the job posting in, copy a section of your resume, and say like, you know, can you edit this to better match the job posting? I think some of that process that I was doing manually, you can leverage LLMs to do. And I personally don't, if someone told me that, oh, I let, you know, Gemini edit my resume, I would see that as a positive, not a negative. This is someone who's willing to try new things and do what it takes to get the result. So yeah, I guess final call for any other questions. Awesome. Well, I just want to say it was great chatting with all of you guys. Really appreciate the thoughtful questions. Feel free to send a request on LinkedIn. And yeah, if you're in Colorado, like maybe we can chat on LinkedIn and arrange like a coffee or something like that. I'm happy to help. I as a non-traditional applicant into tech, smart, ambitious, curious people, I just want to see them succeed in this industry. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you, everyone.
Yeah, plus one on that. If anybody wants to reach out and do a tour of the office and have lunch and have a chat, we'd love to host anybody who's interested, and just feel free to reach out on LinkedIn and we can set that up. We're in Boulder. We love to be part of the Boulder community. Big Buffs fans, big Deion Sanders Prime fans. So, you know, go Buffs and reach out and we'll do anything we can to help. So
yeah, go Bobs.
All right.
Thanks so much, brother.
Thanks everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.